My name is River Blackthorne and I'm 27 years old. Just a few months ago, I was standing on a marble stage, bathed in the warm glow of spotlights, about to accept an award that wasn't mine in front of a crowd of people I had systematically deceived. My entire family was in the audience, their faces a mixture of shock and contempt. The man I was falling in love with stood just a few feet away, believing I was a reclusive heiress. The truth? I had exactly $47.16 in my bank account, and the designer dress I was wearing was a very clever counterfeit I'd bought online. It all started with a phone call that shattered the last remnants of my faith in family, a call that pushed me from quiet academic observation into a world of high-stakes deception. My father's voice, devoid of any warmth, informed me that they were liquidating my graduate school fund. "It's for Stella," he'd said, as if that explained everything. Her new lifestyle brand, "It's a sure thing, River, you understand. Sociology is just a hobby, not a real career." That one sentence lit a fire in me, a fire that would either forge me into something stronger or burn my entire life to the ground. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you've ever had to prove someone wrong, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. The favoritism wasn't a sudden storm, it was the climate I grew up in. My sister, Stella, was the sun. Everything and everyone in our family orbited her. For her 5th birthday, she got a pony. I got a book on geological formations. For her 16th birthday, she received a brand new convertible, cherry red and gleaming. I was given a savings bond that wouldn't mature for a decade. The explanation was always the same. "Stella needs these things, River," my mother would say, patting my hand condescendingly. "She has a certain sparkle. You have your books. You're the smart one, the low-maintenance one." Low maintenance was their code for easy to ignore. It meant my achievements were met with a polite nod while Stella's slightest whims were celebrated with parades. I won the state science fair in 10th grade with a project on urban ecosystems. My parents didn't attend the ceremony, they were at Stella's cheerleading practice. I graduated high school as valedictorian. They left my party early to help Stella pack for a summer trip to Ibiza. They weren't cruel in a loud, aggressive way. Theirs was a quiet, soul-crushing neglect, a constant, unspoken message that my value was secondary. My only sanctuary was my grandmother, Alara. She lived in a small house filled with the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. While my parents saw my curiosity as a quaint but unprofitable quirk, Grandma Alara saw it as a superpower. She never bought me dolls or clothes. She bought me second-hand textbooks on anthropology, biographies of intrepid explorers, and worn copies of classic novels. She'd sit with me for hours, listening to my theories about why people behaved the way they did. "Understanding people is the greatest wealth there is, little bird," she told me once, her eyes twinkling over her spectacles. "Don't ever let anyone convince you that your mind isn't the most valuable asset you own." She was the one who fostered my love for sociology. She saw the patterns I saw, the way my parents performed wealth for their friends, the way Stella's popularity was a currency she traded for favors. Grandma Alara was the only person who saw me, truly saw me, and her belief was the one life raft in the cold ocean of my family's indifference. This long-standing dynamic forced me to become fiercely independent. While Stella was learning how to accessorize, I was learning how to budget. While she was building a social media following, I was building a resume. I worked 2 jobs through my undergraduate degree, bussing tables and shelving books at the university library. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every bursary I could find. I learned to cook cheap, nutritious meals. I learned how to mend my own clothes. The neglect that was meant to diminish me instead forged me into a weapon of self-sufficiency. My pursuit of a PhD in sociology wasn't just an academic interest, it was an act of rebellion. It was my way of taking the pain of my own familial social structure and turning it into a framework for understanding the world. My thesis was on class performance, on the ways people use signals, language, and possessions to construct and maintain social status. It was personal. The final straw came on a Tuesday. I was in the library, surrounded by stacks of books, feeling a rare flicker of hope. I had just been accepted into a prestigious PhD program. It was a conditional acceptance, contingent on me securing my own funding, but my parents had always assured me the money from my grandmother's inheritance was set aside for my education. It was my smart one reward. I called them, my voice buzzing with excitement, ready to share the good news. The line was silent for a moment after I told them. Then, my father cleared his throat. "River, that's nice," he said, the word landing like a stone. "But there's been a change of plans." He launched into the explanation without a trace of apology. Stella, after flitting from one failed venture to another, had decided she was going to be a luxury lifestyle influencer. She needed seed money for branding, a professional website, a high-end wardrobe, and a trip to Bali to establish her aesthetic. They had decided to give her the entirety of my education fund. "It's an investment in a sure thing, River," he'd said, parroting a line I would come to despise. "Stella has over 50,000 followers. You want to spend 7 years reading books to maybe get a teaching job. It's simple math." "It's not math, Dad, it's my future." I remember shouting into the phone, my voice cracking. "That was Grandma's money for me. Your grandmother would want us to be practical." My mother cut in, her voice like ice. "Stella needs this right now. She has an image to maintain. You're the resilient one, River. You're smart. You'll figure it out." "You'll figure it out." The 3 words they had used my entire life to absolve themselves of parental responsibility. I felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, but with a final, quiet finality. It was the sound of a daughter untethering herself from the hope of her parents' love and approval. I hung up the phone, the silence of the library suddenly deafening. I stumbled out into the hallway, collapsing onto a bench, the sobs I'd held back for years finally breaking free. It was a raw, ugly cry, filled with the crushing weight of 2 decades of injustice. Later that night, I tried one last time. I called back, my voice steady and low. I laid out my case logically, like a lawyer pleading for a client. I sent them my acceptance letter, my academic transcripts, letters of recommendation from my professors. I tried to make them understand that this wasn't a hobby, it was my life's passion, my career, the one thing that was truly mine. Their response was a wall of patronizing dismissal. They saw my ambition as a childish dream and Stella's vapid consumerism as a legitimate business enterprise. The conversation ended with my father sighing, "We've made our decision, River. Please don't make this more difficult." I sat in my tiny apartment, the rejection echoing in the room. I felt utterly alone, adrift. Then I remembered. My birthday had been the week before. A small, crisp check from Grandma Alara had arrived in the mail, as it always did. The memo line read, "For your research, little bird." It was only $500, a pittance compared to what my parents had just given Stella, but in that moment, it felt like a fortune. It felt like faith. As I sat there, holding that check, an advertisement flashed on my laptop screen. It was for the Æthelgard Resort, a legendary bastion of old money and new luxury, nestled on a private island. The kind of place my sister aspired to, and the kind of place my thesis was about. An idea began to form in my mind, a wild, reckless, and deeply academic idea. It was born of desperation and a sudden, burning need to do more than just observe from the outside. If my family and the world valued performance over substance, then I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would take my grandmother's research grant and use it to conduct the most immersive ethnographic study imaginable. I wouldn't just write about the elite, I would become one of them. Or at least, I would pretend to. I went online and booked the cheapest, shabbiest motel room I could find on the mainland, just a ferry ride away from the Æthelgard. My fieldwork was about to begin. The first 2 days were a masterclass in humiliation. I took the early morning ferry to the resort island, dressed in my most convincing, understated wealth, outfit a beige linen blouse from a thrift store and a pair of trousers I'd painstakingly tailored myself. My goal was simply to blend into the common areas, the grand lobby, the sprawling terraces, the poolside cafes. I bought a single $20 glass of iced tea and made it last for 4 hours, all while furiously and surreptitiously typing observation notes into a hidden file on my phone. Every moment was a tightrope walk of anxiety. I felt the gaze of the real guests, their eyes flicking over my off-brand handbag and my worn-at-the-edges shoes. They didn't speak to me, of course. I was invisible, a piece of furniture. Their conversations swirled around me, a symphony of casual entitlement. They discussed summering in the Hamptons, the trouble with staffing their yachts, the hideous price of modern art. It was everything my research had predicted. But hearing it live was like listening to a foreign language I had only ever read in books. The sheer, unthinking privilege was suffocating. At night, I'd retreat to my damp, musty motel room. The contrast was dizzying. I'd eat instant noodles while transcribing my notes, a bitter taste in my mouth that had nothing to do with the cheap soup. On my phone, Instagram taunted me with glimpses of Stella's life. There she was, posing on a balcony in Bali, a designer dress shimmering in the sunset, the caption reading, "Manifesting my best life. Boss babe luxury lifestyle." She was spending my future and I was rationing ketchup packets. The injustice was a physical ache, a constant pressure behind my ribs. It fueled me. My notes became sharper, my analysis more critical. I wasn't just observing anymore, I was dissecting. The moment everything changed happened on my third day. I was sitting on the edge of the infinity pool area, trying to look like I was waiting for someone and not like I was terrified a security guard would ask to see my room key, which I obviously didn't have. A frantic-looking woman in a crisp hotel uniform was rushing past, holding a tablet and muttering into a headset. She stopped abruptly and stared at me. "Miss Blackwood?" she asked, her voice a mix of relief and stress. "Oh, thank goodness. We were so worried you weren't coming. Your suite is ready. We had to move some things around, but the ocean view is spectacular." I froze. "Blackwood? My name is Blackthorne." The similarity was a cosmic joke. My mind raced. This was my chance, the ultimate access. My academic ethics screamed in protest, but the voice of my desperation screamed louder. Before I could correct her, before my deeply ingrained honesty could betray this insane opportunity, she was grabbing my cheap tote bag and leading me towards the private villas. "We do apologize for the confusion at check-in," she chattered on. "Mr. Henderson has already sent up a bottle of the 98 Rothschild as an apology. He's so looking forward to meeting you. He's a huge admirer of your family's quiet philanthropy." Quiet philanthropy. It was perfect. The Blackwoods were apparently some reclusive, old-money family, the kind that didn't splash their faces across magazines. It was a blank canvas. I was led into a suite that was larger than my entire apartment building. A wall of glass looked out over the turquoise ocean. A platter of exotic fruits sat on a mahogany table next to a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my rent for a year. I was in. I was no longer an observer. I was a subject. It was in this surreal new reality that I met him, Julian Thorne. He was sitting on the adjoining balcony of the neighboring suite, reading a book. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't loud or flashy like the other men I'd observed. There was a stillness about him, an intensity in his gaze when he looked up and saw me. "You must be Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice calm and warm. "I'm Julian." "River," I managed to say, my heart pounding. We started talking. He didn't ask me about my family's money or what yacht club I belonged to. He asked me about the book I was pretending to read. He asked me what I thought about the architecture of the resort. He was intelligent, curious, and disarmingly genuine. And because I was playing a character, I was bolder than I would normally be. I wasn't the shy, broke grad student. I was a mysterious heiress. I used my sociological training to my advantage. I didn't brag. I asked questions. I listened intently. I offered observations on the social dynamics around us, framing them not as academic analysis, but as the bored musings of someone who had seen it all. Julian was captivated. "You see things differently?" He told me that first evening, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "It's refreshing. Most people here are just reciting a script." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I was reciting a script more than anyone, but my performance, it turned out, was working beyond my wildest dreams. I was gathering the richest, most nuanced first-hand data I could ever have imagined. My thesis was transforming from a dry academic paper into a living, breathing story. And I was, terrifyingly, starting to enjoy the role. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt important. The only problem was, they were seeing someone who didn't exist. My deception deepened with each passing day. I became an expert at the subtle art of being wealthy. I learned to order wine with a dismissive wave, to talk about travel to places I'd only seen in documentaries, to feign a casual indifference to price tags that made my real-world self break out in a cold sweat. The resort staff treated me like royalty. The other guests, who had previously ignored me, now sought my company, eager to be associated with the mystique of the Blackwood name. My relationship with Julian blossomed in this strange gilded cage. He was the heir to the Thorne Foundation, a massive global charity, but he wore his privilege with a sense of profound responsibility. He was passionate about social justice and economic inequality, and he saw in my observations a kindred spirit. We would have long conversations late into the night, debating everything from gentrification to the ethics of philanthropy. I was falling for him hard. And he was falling for the carefully constructed persona I had created. It was a terrifying and exhilarating paradox. The more I revealed my true mind, my sociological insights, the more he was drawn to my fake identity. "You have such a clear, unsentimental way of looking at the world," he said one afternoon. "It's like you can see the machinery beneath the surface." He had no idea how right he was. He thought it was the wisdom of an old money scion. It was the critical eye of a broke, marginalized academic. The guilt was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my performance. But the data I was collecting was extraordinary. My thesis was writing itself, filled with verbatim quotes, detailed descriptions of social rituals, and a deep analysis of the anxieties that plagued even the most privileged. This was my justification. This was for my work, for my future, for a vindication my family would never give me. The turning point, the moment the charade spun out of my control, came a week into my stay. Julian was organizing a small, exclusive philanthropy summit at the resort. The keynote speaker had canceled at the last minute. Over dinner, Julian, buzzing with an idea, turned to me. "You should do it," he said, his eyes shining. "River, you should speak." I almost choked on my ridiculously expensive sea base. "Me? Julian, I can't. I'm not a public speaker." "Don't be ridiculous," he countered, his enthusiasm infectious. "The way you talk about social structures, about the responsibility of wealth, it's exactly what these people need to hear, not another stuffy speech from a banker, a fresh perspective. A real perspective." He wouldn't take no for an answer. He saw my hesitation as humility, not sheer, unadulterated terror. Before I knew it, it was settled. The resort began promoting the event with a new headliner, River Blackwood, the enigmatic philanthropist, who would be receiving the Foundation's Next Generation Visionary Award for her family's discreet but impactful contributions. An award, a public stage. It was a nightmare disguised as a triumph. My small, contained research project had morphed into a public spectacle. Just as my carefully constructed world was threatening to implode, a call came from the world I had left behind. It was Stella. Her voice was thin, reedy, stripped of its usual breezy confidence. She was crying. "It's all gone, River," she sobbed into the phone. "Everything. The money, it's all gone." Her influencer brand had been a spectacular failure. She had been scammed by a web developer, had bought thousands of dollars of unsellable inventory, and had been publicly called out by a legitimate brand for stealing their designs. The 50,000 followers she'd boasted about were mostly bots she had paid for. The scandal was all over the niche gossip blogs she frequented. She was humiliated and, for the first time in her life, completely lost. My first instinct was a bitter, satisfying surge of schadenfreude, but as I listened to her genuine despair, something else took over. It was the muscle memory of being the capable one. I found myself calmly walking her through the immediate steps she needed to take. I told her how to issue a public apology, how to contact her bank's fraud department, how to attempt to return the merchandise. I was logical, practical, and clear-headed. I used the same analytical skills I was using to navigate the treacherous social waters of the Æthelgard. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "How do you know all this stuff?" Stella asked, her voice small and laced with a new, unfamiliar emotion, respect. "Because while you were learning how to take selfies, I was learning how to survive," I said, the words coming out more gently than I intended. In that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. It was a hairline fracture in the foundation of our entire relationship. For the first time, she wasn't calling me for a handout, but for my expertise. She saw, for a fleeting second, that the skills I had cultivated in the shadows of her spotlight had real, tangible value. A seed of a new kind of sisterhood was planted in the scorched earth of her failure. My parents, of course, saw things differently. My mother called me the next day, her voice sharp with fury, not at Stella, but at the situation. "Your sister is a mess," she lamented. "All that money wasted. I don't suppose you could help her out? You've always been so good at saving." The audacity was breathtaking. She had no idea where I was or what I was doing. She didn't even ask. In her mind, I was still the low-maintenance background character, the reliable little ATM of common sense and, she hoped, cash. The obliviousness was staggering. It solidified my resolve. My speech at the summit wouldn't just be a performance, it would be a reckoning. The final, fatal piece of the puzzle clicked into place 2 days before the summit. Julian came to my suite, his face glowing with pride and excitement. "I have a surprise for you," he announced. "I know you're private, and that your family is too, but an event like this, they should be here to see you honored. I pulled a few strings with your university's alumni records to find a contact. I've invited them, your parents and your sister. They're arriving tomorrow." The blood drained from my face. My carefully segregated worlds were about to collide with the force of a particle accelerator. My family, the living embodiment of the injustice that had propelled me into this lie, was coming to the Aethelgard. They were coming to witness my greatest triumph, which was also my most elaborate fraud. The trap wasn't just set, it was armed and ticking. There was no escape. The day of the summit arrived like a death sentence. I stood in my counterfeit gown, staring at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I looked the part. I looked like a woman who belonged here. But inside, I was a terrified grad student about to be exposed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. I met them in the lobby, my father, mother, and Stella, looking utterly bewildered by the sheer opulence of the Aethelgard. Their eyes scanned the soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, then landed on me. There was no pride in their expressions, no joy, only suspicion and a cold, hard judgment. "River, what is this?" my father hissed, pulling me aside as a bellhop took their bags. "What have you done? Who is paying for all of this?" The assumption was immediate and insulting. I hadn't earned this. I must have compromised myself for it. In their eyes, I was incapable of achieving this level of success on my own terms. Stella was quiet, her gaze flickering between me and the wealthy guests gliding past. The arrogance had been stripped from her, replaced by a dazed confusion. She looked at my dress, at the effortless way I greeted a passing staff member by name, and for the first time I think she realized she had no idea who I was. The event began. We were seated at a table of honor at the front of the grand ballroom. Julian was at my side, holding my hand under the table, whispering words of encouragement. My parents sat stiffly, their disapproval a palpable force field. They spoke in hushed, angry tones to each other, convinced I was some sort of con artist, or worse, a kept woman. Their shame wasn't for their past actions, it was for the public embarrassment they were certain I was about to cause them. This was the final, public slight. They were seated at a table celebrating my success, and yet they had never made me feel more invisible. Finally, the moment came. The president of the Thorne Foundation finished his introduction, his voice booming through the ballroom. A visionary thinker with a unique and powerful perspective on the social fabrics that bind us and separate us. It is my immense honor to present the Next Generation Visionary Award to Miss River Blackwood. Applause filled the room. Julian squeezed my hand and smiled at me with pure, unadulterated love. I felt a wave of nausea. I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of glass and walked toward the marble podium. I saw hundreds of faces looking up at me, expectant. I saw Julian, my anchor in this sea of lies. I saw my parents, their faces tight with contempt, and I saw Stella, her expression a turbulent mix of confusion, envy, and a tiny, emerging flicker of something that looked like awe. I reached the podium. The pre-written speech was in front of me, full of elegant platitudes about philanthropy and social responsibility. I placed my hands on either side of it. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could do it. I could read the speech, accept the award, and maintain the fiction. But I looked at my parents' faces one last time, and I saw the culmination of a lifetime of being underestimated, and I knew I couldn't. My silence had protected their comfort for too long. I pushed the speech aside. I leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," I began, my voice miraculously steady. "My name is River Blackthorne, and I am a fraud." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. I saw Julian's face fall, confusion clouding his features. My parents looked like they had been turned to stone. I had their undivided attention. "The woman you were invited here to honor, River Blackwood, does not exist." Or if she does, it is not me," I continued, speaking with the calm, measured tone of a lecturer presenting a paper. "I am a PhD candidate in sociology at Northwood University. My thesis is on the performance of class and the construction of social status, and for the past 2 weeks you have all been my unwitting field study." I told them everything. I laid my entire deception bare. I talked about my research, the theories of Bourdieu and Goffman. Then, I made it personal. "My research grant for this immersive study," I said, my eyes finding my parents', came in the form of a liquidated college fund. A fund my parents decided would be better invested in my sister's fleeting career as a social media influencer than in my education. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I simply presented the facts. I detailed my observations of their world, the coded language, the casual cruelties, the anxieties that lay beneath the polished veneer of wealth. Then, I turned the analytical lens on myself. I confessed my guilt, my moral compromises, the way I had used their assumptions against them. I apologized to the staff I had misled, and finally, I looked directly at Julian. "I am so sorry, Julian. My feelings for you are the only real thing in this entire charade. But you deserve honesty, and you have not received it from me." I was prepared for shouting, for security to drag me off the stage. I was prepared for ruin. I was not prepared for what happened next. An elderly man in the front row stood up. It was Alistair Thorne, Julian's grandfather and the patriarch of the foundation. He was a legend, a formidable figure. He raised a hand, silencing the frantic murmurs. "Miss Blackthorne," he said, his voice raspy but powerful, carrying across the silent room. "What you call fraud, I call the most audacious and brilliant piece of immersive research I have ever encountered. My grandson shared your notes with me, thinking they were idle musings. They are not. They are a groundbreaking sociological document. The Next Generation Visionary Award is for vision, and young woman, you have it in spades. The award stands." He began to applaud, slowly. Then all at once, others joined him. Julian, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, hurt, and dawning admiration, walked from his chair to the edge of the stage. He didn't look angry. He looked at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. He reached out and took my hand. But the most significant movement came from my family's table. Stella stood up. Tears were streaming down her face. She looked at our parents, who were frozen in a state of public humiliation, and she made a choice. She walked away from them, pushing her chair back with a scrape that echoed in the vast room. She came to the side of the stage and just stood there, looking up at me, her allegiance declared in that one simple act of movement. My grandmother, Alara, whom Stella must have brought with her, also rose to her feet, her applause loud and proud, her face a beacon of vindication. My parents were left utterly alone at their table of honor, isolated and exposed, not by my anger, but by my truth. The performance was over. In the aftermath of the summit, my life transformed. I didn't get expelled from my PhD program, I became its most talked about student. The story of my study became a minor academic legend. The Thorne Foundation, true to Alistair's word, formally offered to fund the remainder of my research, providing a grant that was more than triple what my parents had taken from me. They wanted to publish my thesis, when it was finished, as a book. My relationship with Julian, which I was sure was destroyed, was rebuilt from the rubble of my confession. It was slow and painful at first. There was hurt to overcome, trust to be re-earned. But he had fallen for my mind and my spirit, and he came to see that the real River Blackthorne, the broke, determined, fiercely intelligent academic, was infinitely more interesting than the fictional heiress she had portrayed. Our new beginning was built on a foundation of radical honesty, and it was stronger than any lie. I was surrounded by a new family, a chosen family: Julian, his grandfather, the academics who championed my work, and the friends I made who valued my mind, not a mythical bank account. My parents were shattered by the public humiliation. Their social standing, which they had so carefully curated, was decimated overnight. The story rippled through their community. The story of the brilliant daughter they had cast aside. They sent fumbling, clumsy letters of apology, full of excuses and self-pity. Remorse, for them, was not an event, but a long, arduous journey they were only just beginning. I agreed to meet them a month later, not in their grand house or a fancy restaurant, but in a neutral coffee shop. Stella was there, sitting beside me, a quiet and solid presence. I didn't shout. I didn't recriminate. I calmly laid out the new terms of our relationship. It would be one built on respect, a respect I had earned and now demanded. There would be no more comparisons, no more favoritism, no more low-maintenance expectations. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could give them, it was something they would have to earn over time. The power dynamic had shifted forever. I no longer needed their approval, I had my own. Looking back on it all, the moral of this crazy story seems so clear to me now. Your worth is not something that is granted to you by your family, your bank account, or your social status. It is something you forge yourself in the fires of adversity and the quiet, lonely hours of hard work. The labels society tries to stick on your itch: poor, success, failure, are flimsy and temporary. The only identity that matters is the one you build from your own integrity and your own truth. I went to the Athelgard seeking to understand the world of the privileged, but what I found was myself. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever had to become someone else to show the world who you really are? Share your own story of transformation in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to read them. And please, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you and subscribe for more stories. Remember, sometimes the most authentic version of yourself is waiting just on the other side of your greatest fear.